As a matter of international security, it is well known that, with regards to safety, prime ministers and presidents are able to travel across the world in the most secure, protected, and technologically advanced transportation possible, especially aeroplanes. Most people are aware of the likes of Air Force One or the Command Point airliners, which ensure reliability and safe passage for the US and Russian presidents respectively. As technology, militarized aircraft, and terrorism continue to advance and modify in the modern world, it is normally an expensive, highly skilled task for the planning and creation of planes which are able to withstand or defend themselves from any given threat. However, such planning and secure migration from country to country wasn't always so safe, and unfortunately for President Samora Machel of Mozambique, along with 33 others, their lives would come to an end after boarding a routine jetliner on October the 19th, 1986. This unfortunate event, coupled with the slow demise of apartheid in South Africa, raised many questions about what happened that evening, and slowly but surely, the conspiracies began to spread across the land. In this video, we will look at the events leading up to the crash itself, and which theories spawned from the horrific occurrence over the terrains of Mbuzini, South Africa. Why and how could the plane crash when there was no apparent mechanical issues? What reasons could there have been for negligence on behalf of the pilots? And could the supposed conspiracy theories transform into facts? As ever, we will aim to discover and dissect the evidence and events as officially presented, as well as looking at alternative points of view to try and work out what happened on that day. Samora Machel was the first president of Mozambique who came to office in 1975 following the country's independence, and had already served a decade of his presidency before the night in question. A military commander and socialist, Machel was both revered and loathed for his anti-colonial stance and support for the end of apartheid. After attending meetings in the capital of Maputo, the Zambian town of Mbala, and having flown to face other African nation delegates, he eventually reboarded the doomed plane around 6:38 p.m. on the evening of the 19th. The return leg of his journey was due to arrive 3 hours later in the Mozambican capital, along with his security detail and associates. All seemed well according to the men in the cockpit, which consisted of Captain Yuri Novodran, co-pilot Igor Kartamayshev, flight engineer Vladimir Novoselov, as well as support from the flight navigator and radio operations technician. The plane, a Soviet-engineered C-9CAA, which was built by Tupolev, the Russian aerospace and defense company, was specifically constructed for use in the Mozambique region as well as surrounding areas. Again, all checks were sufficient prior to takeoff, from the pilots and crew, all of which were employed by the government and had ample experience, to the plane itself, whose last inspection 2 years prior concluded no faults or issues. As the plane progressed and approximately 2 hours into the flight, radio contact was initiated by the captain to Maputo Air Traffic Control, informing them that they would continue on their current flight path towards the capital's upcoming navigational beacon. Unfortunately, the conversations and coordinated directional plan seemed to get lost in translation from this point on. Having been informed to delve towards 3,000 feet, the plane continued its descent towards the supposed runway when, at approximately 21:10 hours, the plane began to deviate in another direction due to an inadvertent selection of the Matsapa VOR frequency in Swaziland. The captain did briefly question the need for the rotation, but eventually he and the navigator were overheard concurring the alternative flight path as correct and in conjunction with the navigational beacon. This strange confusion amongst the pilot and crew and navigator continued as the instrument landing systems, or ILS, were not visible, nor were they in the plane's flight path, thus prompting another call to the Maputo ATC. Taking the captain's concern of the ILS into consideration, the command center switched to a visual approach landing procedure. However, this was also worrying for the crew, as they couldn't see any such runway or command post in their wake. Despite the turmoil aboard the plane and no distinguishable landing stretch, the plane continued to reduce its altitude as it descended from the night sky to the dangerous terrain below. At around 21:20 hours that evening, the last recorded words from the plane's cockpit voice recorder captures the captain's panic, as by now the aircraft is flying too low, with impact imminent. There's nowhere to go. There's no NDBs. Nothing. At this point, the plane would have struck the hilly terrain in the remote village of Mbuzini, between the borders of Mozambique, Swaziland, and in the province of Mpumalanga, South Africa. Of the 44 occupants on board, there was a total of 34 fatalities, including that of President Machel. After contact was terminated, the Maputo ATC sent out a search and rescue team to find the president and all of those on board. However, they began the operation by looking in the wrong place. As night progressed and the morning light came into view, all relative helicopters, ground teams, and special planes searched high and low around Maputo Bay and surrounding areas before eventually finding the wreckage and survivors. As it transpired, the plane's crash was approximately 500 feet or 150 meters within South African territory, and so initial investigations began after Komati Port Police were informed by a local resident near the crash site. From there, the South African Department of Transport took control of the investigation and requested the assistance of the British Air Accidents Investigation Branch, as well as the United States National Transportation Safety Board. However, both Western governing bodies refused to get involved, so it was down to the African government to employ the expertise of 3 foreign investigators. These included former US test pilot and aeronautical engineer Frank Borman, astronaut and former head of the British Air Accident Team Geoffrey Wilkinson, as well as former Lord Justice of Appeal Sir Edward Everley. The small board of investigators were put together and chaired by Judge Cecil Margot between January the 20th and 26th, 1987. Judge Margot would also chair another air disaster riddled with conspiracy theories, the Heidelberg accident of 87. The Machel Inquiry Board very quickly determined that the cause of the crash was not due to a bomb or explosive device on the plane, and that the initial rotation from the flight path made by the pilots was advised by the navigator and his use of the autopilot Doppler navigation mode. This mode is an aided navigation system which uses Doppler effect radar interaction with the Earth and dead reckoning calculations to navigate. By measuring the movement of the ground with radar, it is able to compare this to the airspeed returned from aircraft instruments. According to the board, this was initiated because the flight's navigator noticed the very high frequency omnidirectional range, or VOR signal, indicating that the aircraft had intercepted Maputo's VOR radius. This interception was needed to approach and land on the initially scheduled runway 23. Unfortunately, as it would be uncovered, there was a mix-up with another VOR which was within close range, thought to be the 45-degree radial at Matsapa Airport in Swaziland, leading to the misjudgment and eventual crash of the plane. Close proximity airports generally work on different frequencies to avoid confusion. However, Maputo Airport's frequency was 112.7 MHz, whilst Matsapa's was 112.3 MHz. Shockingly close, and very easy to confuse. It was also concluded that the aircraft did not have enough fuel to re-alter its course and land at an alternative landing strip, such as Beira, having not refueled at Mbala. Therefore, the continuous lowering of altitude, despite no ILS in the vicinity, was both cautious and catastrophic. Questions and criticism of the flight crew would persist, as the board would chastise their failures to conduct and perform simple checklist codes and/or identify navigational aids. Not only were their procedural decisions denounced, but the conversations, phraseology, and other distractions within the cockpit would most definitely have added to the mistakes and difficulties which befell the team in relation to the ILS signals and navigational beacons. Also, why hadn't the captain ordered a climb to a minimum safe altitude over Maputo if there were no visual aids to assist in the landing of the plane, as well as the onboard confusion which was eventually present? Let us now look at why such a set of issues culminated in the downing of the flight on that evening in October 1986. The biggest claim arose in the form of an allegation that the South African Defence Force had placed a decoy VOR beacon to detract the plane from its original path and attract it towards the South African border. Not only this, but it is noted that the aircraft had indeed entered the militarised, highly restricted airspace within South Africa, and though under major surveillance, it is questioned as to why the ATC had refrained from notifying the crew of the possible danger that lay ahead of them. According to helicopter pilots who were in the region of the crash the morning after its collision, relayed their questions and concerns to the Minister of Security for Mozambique, Sergio Vieira. When discussed at the board's inquiry, Judge Margot and his team of experts still maintains that the airfield at Matsapa and its VOR, along with their criticisms of pilot error, were the most plausible reasons for the misdirection. A subsequent review by a Soviet Union delegation countered this theory and would not agree on the full logic of the crash, stating that the VOR signal was misinterpreted due to frequency interruption caused by nearby mountains. This theory was put to the test and interpreted by both commercial and militarized flights, who all seemed to gain clear and correct signaling from Matsapa. However, it was becoming apparent that Mozambican officials were convinced of foul play and subsequently suspended the air traffic controller who was on call the night of the crash. According to the government, the hysteria and paranoia warranted them enough reason to suspend the person on the basis that the ATC had taken a bribe to deliberately tamper with the beacon and ILS systems to ensure the plane veered from its course and to place it in jeopardy. Another speculative position involved the South African Foreign Minister Roelof Frederick Botha, or PIK, as he became known due to his posture and likeliness to a penguin when wearing a suit. It was reported by a former military intelligence officer that Botha had attended a meeting with a high-level security team in the classified and secure police base known as Squamans the day before the fatal crash. What was discussed at this meeting? No one knows. What is known is that Botha publicly stated on camera that he and President Machel were very good friends and that the crash was indeed a major tragedy. However, it doesn't take too much digging to uncover that South Africa's State Security Council, SSC, had discussed at length in 1984 the possibilities and maneuvers that could be instilled to assist in the overthrow of President Machel's government. High-ranking majors and generals were involved in the secret consultations as to how the incumbent Frelimo party could be abolished in order to infiltrate and force a new governing body, the Renamo Party of Mozambique. The obvious difference between both parties was their social, political stance. Frelimo was a democratic socialist party founded in 1962 with communist ideas and left-wing nationalism. On the opposing side was Renamo, or the Mozambican National Resistance, a right-wing militarized organization whose conservatism and anti-communist ideals led to affiliations with the Democratic Union of Africa. Both parties would be involved in numerous conflicts until the eventual Mozambique peace agreement, which was signed in 1992, bringing an end to the country's civil war. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that one of the acts of resistance and tactful assaults on the Frelimo party and its leaders was devised by the SSC and Renamo party, and that the meeting the night before the crash affirms their plans. This conspiracy theory was included in the report and investigated as a potential fact by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission (TRC) of South Africa in the years after the crash and peace agreement. A false beacon and absence of warning warranted further investigation by an appropriate structure, according to their findings. Over the years, the TRC have also found the South African Civil Corporation Bureau, CCB, guilty of numerous killings and suspected of many more during the apartheid era. The CBB was a government-sponsored counterinsurgency, or COIN, unit, which was established during those turbulent years and managed under the authority of Defence Minister General Magnus Malan. One of the unit's former members, Hans Lau, declared by public admission in January 2003, while serving a 28-year prison sentence, that he was involved in a secret operation to assassinate President Machel. His reference to the previously theorized false beacon in the plot was used as the decoy to ensure the plane veered from its safe course and that he was stationed nearby to shoot it down if the jetliner failed to crash. Although a special police unit conducted multiple investigations into the claims made by Lau and others who also claimed to have conspired with him to bring the plane down, it was decided that there was no specific evidence to permit or advocate their statements. With the eventual peace agreement being reached and the apartheid era finally coming to an end, there has been scope to re-look at certain events and their related theories, one of which was the 2006 inquiry into the death of President Machel. Although numerous investigative teams had been tasked with the probe and with their intention of submitting their findings by the end of the same year, apparently no investigation has reached a conclusion, according to South African Minister of Safety and Security, Charles Nakula. So, even after 3 decades have passed, the fateful crash of the C9 CAA Tupolev, as well as the death of President Machel, what happened on that evening in October 1986 will remain one of the great mysteries of the apartheid era. Could it be that the government of South Africa worked alongside the insurgents of the Renamo resistance to overthrow Machel's government, therefore killing him in the process? Were false beacons and deliberate confusion, as well as refusals to follow protocol in alerting the crew of their pending doom, used as the basis for the killing? As the case remains open to this day, I guess we will never know. This brings us to the end of this episode. Take care, and as ever, keep asking questions.